Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Arthur Harrison. I'm 58 years old, and for my entire adult life, I consider myself an ordinary office worker, just a regular guy, living a regular life. I've spent the last 3 decades at the same company, climbing the ladder just high enough to be comfortable, but not high enough to be stressed. My son is grown and independent, and my mortgage is almost paid. I'm just 2 years away from retirement. 2 years into what I've always called normal life, the life where you finally get to just be. But what I've learned and what I want to talk to you about today is that when you spend your life just waiting for normal to begin, you can miss the fact that the life you're actually living is silently falling apart. My story begins, as so many of these quiet domestic tragedies do, with a sound in the night. The click and lower of the refrigerator door closing echoed from the kitchen into the living room. It was 9 p.m. My wife, Eleanor, was cleaning up after dinner. Her usual routine, wiping counters, setting the dishwasher. I was in my recliner, watching TV on my phone. Or, that's what it looked like. Actually, I wasn't really watching anything. I was just staring at the screen, my thumb idly scrolling through news feeds and video clips I had no memory of. It was a habit. The screen was a buffer against the silence of the house. It was just noise to fill the space that, for many years, had been filled with conversation or the sound of our son playing, or just a shared life. Now, it was just the fridge and the phone. A few minutes later, Eleanor walked through the living room, drying her hands on a towel. "Good work," she said quietly as she passed me, not breaking her stride on the way to the bedroom. "You too," I replied, my eyes never leaving the phone. It was the same exchange we had every night. It was as if she was greeting a colleague at the end of a long shift. And that's what we had become. Colleagues, partners in the long, drawn-out project of maintaining a household. Our marriage had been going on for 32 years. As I said, our son had moved out 5 years ago, and now it was just the two of us in a house that felt too large and too quiet. And honestly, it wasn't bad. That's the dangerous part. It wasn't awful. There was no yelling, no fighting, no major drama. But it wasn't particularly good, either. It was just beige. It was a flat line of a relationship that had technically survived, but wasn't truly alive. That night, however, something broke the routine. Instead of continuing to the bedroom, Eleanor stopped. She turned, and she sat down in the armchair opposite me. This was rare. By 9 p.m., we were usually in our separate orbits. She looked more serious than I'd seen her in years. I felt a small, cold prickle of something, not fear exactly. Annoyance? Intrigue? I tapped the screen of my phone, and the video went dark. I put down the TV remote. "What is it?" Eleanor, who I've always known to be a strong, composed woman, took a visible breath. She looked at her hands, which were folded neatly in her lap. "I have something to talk about." I waited. The silence that I had been trying to fill with my phone suddenly felt enormous, heavy. She looked up, and her eyes met mine. "I want to live with someone." I just stared at her. The words didn't compute. My brain tried to file the request. Live with someone? We are living together," I said, my voice sounding stupid to my own ears. "Do you mean your sister? Is she having trouble?" "No, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but incredibly firm. "That's not what I mean." She paused again, choosing her next words with surgical precision that I would later come to understand was a result of months of internal debate. Even though we're not a couple in that way anymore, I'd like to try living with someone else for a little while. A chill, thin and sharp, ran down my spine. It wasn't a wave of heat, not anger. It was a cold, spreading numbness. I stared at Eleanor's face, my wife of 32 years. She looked determined and terrified and tired. She looked down, away from my gaze. "So," I said, and I was shocked at how calm my own voice sounded. "You're in a relationship?" "Yes." She nodded slightly, still looking at her hands. "Mr. Julian." "Julian?" "He's 47 years old," she continued, the information coming out in a pre-rehearsed, factual stream. "He works in the kitchen. He's a chef. He's younger than me." 47. 11 years younger than me. Of course. The information was trying to find purchase in my brain, but it was all just slipping. A chef. 47, Julian. Where did you meet him? "At the cooking class." And just like that, another piece clicked into place with sickening clarity. I remembered, about 6 months ago, Eleanor had suddenly announced she was starting a cooking class every Tuesday night. She'd said she wanted to start something new, to learn a skill. I'd encouraged it. Good for you, I'd said. Have fun. I'd enjoyed the peace and quiet on Tuesday nights. It never once occurred to me that something new wasn't a recipe. It was a person. And the teacher, he was a teacher. What kind of relationship could it be that she'd met a man there? Had this been going on for 6 months? Eleanor must have seen the question on my face. She finally raised her head. Her eyes held a deep, profound sense of apology, but also a steel-plated determination that I hadn't seen in her for a decade. Nothing has happened yet, she said, and I believed her. Eleanor wasn't a liar, but I'd like to talk to this person in more depth. I'd like to spend time with him. Properly. I remained silent. I was completely paralyzed. I didn't know whether to be angry or sad, or to just laugh at the sheer, calm absurdity of it all. This wasn't a tearful confession of a passionate mistake. This was a proposal, a business plan. How long? I finally asked. 3 months, she said. I'd like to try living with him for 3 months. I didn't even know if 3 months was a long or a short time for something like this. What should I do in the meantime? Sit here and wait? What about the house? What about us? I want you to live a normal life, she said. I'll come over. I'll still take care of the household matters. The bills, the cleaning schedule. I'll make sure everything is sorted. Her words were so strangely realistic that it made the whole thing feel like a fever dream. She spoke as if she were going on a short business trip, as if she were being temporarily reassigned to a different branch office, but would still be managing her home accounts remotely. Why? I asked, why now after 32 years? Eleanor thought for a long moment, not to find the answer, but I think to find the courage to say it. In a few years, I'll be 60. You'll be retired. Our life will be set. And I'm scared, Arthur. I'm scared of growing old and ending up as no one's woman. Her words struck me with a physical pang of guilt, because in that single, devastating sentence, I was forced to ask myself a question I had avoided for years. Was she my woman? When was the last time I had ever, in any meaningful way, treated her as such? What do you think of me? I whispered, not even sure what I was asking. Eleanor looked troubled, her resolve softening for the first time. I care about you, Arthur. I really do. You're my family. But lately, for a long time, really, it feels more like we're roommates in a married couple, doesn't it? I couldn't deny it. It's true. We say hello in the morning. We say good work at night. We eat at the same table, but I'm on my phone, and she's reading a magazine. At night, we each watch TV on our own separate screens, in separate rooms. On weekends, we don't do anything in particular, just errands and existing. I wonder when this would become our life. My wife, Eleanor, had just calmly informed me that she was leaving for 3 months to try living with a 47-year-old chef named Julian. And I was just sitting there. My mind was like a computer that had been given a command it couldn't possibly process. I finally found my voice. What is this guy? Julian, what does he think of this? Of me? Does he know you're just trying him out for 3 months? Eleanor's answer was, like everything else she'd said, painfully honest. You won't know until you spend time together. She must have seen the hurt in my eyes, because she softened just a little. Arthur, this isn't really about him. This is about me. I need to see if I'm still capable of feeling that kind of connection, or if I'm just done. And he's a kind man. He listens. He listens. That's what it came down to. A 47-year-old chef who listens. And I, her husband of 32 years, apparently did not. This wasn't a fiery, passionate affair. This was worse. This was a calm, rational, and logical decision. An exit strategy. If you choose him in those 3 months, then what? I asked, the word divorce feeling like acid on my tongue. Then we'll have a proper discussion, she said, her voice regaining its steady managerial tone. About the house, about the finances, about everything. Properly. But I'm not there yet. I just need this time. I looked at her, my wife, the woman I'd built my entire life with, and I realized with a soul-crushing certainty that I had absolutely no power here. I couldn't get angry. I couldn't yell or throw something. I couldn't forbid her from going. What leverage did I have? The roommate card? Our marriage, the one I had let coast on autopilot for a decade, was a hollowed-out shell. She was just the first one to finally, officially, walk out the door. I sank back into my recliner. I looked up at the ceiling. Should I accept the situation or reject it? It was a laughable question. But looking into Eleanor's eyes, I began to think that this might be what she needed. And maybe, just maybe, I deserve this. When does it start? I asked, the words tasting like ash. I've already made the arrangements. It's starting next Monday. A new, sharper chill. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. This had been planned. The cooking class, the quiet distance, this very conversation. It wasn't a request for permission. It was an announcement. I understand. I sighed, the two words feeling like the heaviest things I'd ever lifted. Eleanor actually looked surprised. Are you sure, Arthur? I gave a short, bitter laugh. Are you? It doesn't matter if I'm sure or not. You've made your decision. Even if I say no, I can't stop you, can I? You just go anyway. At least this way, you're not lying about it. That night, we talked for a long time, for the first time in a while. But it wasn't the talk I wanted to have. I didn't get to find out what I wanted to know the most. I couldn't bring myself to ask, are you going to sleep with him on the first night? Have you already kissed him? How far do you intend to let this go? Instead, our long talk was about logistics. She explained how she'd set up the automatic bill payments. She confirmed the days a gardener was coming. She was, essentially, briefing her replacement. And I, the stunned roommate, just nodded along, taking mental notes on how to run the house she was abandoning. I couldn't concentrate at work the next day. I was just a ghost in a polo shirt, staring at spreadsheets that meant nothing. The numbers blurred. All I could see was 3 months. Julian, 47. My colleague David, who sat in the next cubicle, leaned over. Arthur, you look pale. Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept. Yes, I'm fine, David. I mumbled, just been a little sleep-deprived. David, who was 5 years younger than me, sighed. I've heard that. Me and my wife, we're having our own troubles. It's tough, isn't it? Sometimes I feel like we're just two different companies that happen to share an office space. I just nodded, turning back to my screen. If only you knew, David. You're worried about sharing office space. My coworker just gave her 3-month notice to go try out a competitor. I can't talk to anyone about this. It was too bizarre, too humiliating. That night, Eleanor called Julian. She was in the kitchen, and I was in my recliner, the TV off. I tried not to listen, but the house was so quiet, I couldn't help it. I could tell her voice sounded brighter than usual. There was a lightness to it, a lilt I hadn't heard in years. It was the voice of the 30-year-old Eleanor, the one who used to laugh at my stupid jokes. I heard her say, I'm so glad we talked. Yes, Monday is perfect. I look forward to seeing you. My heart ached. A dull, physical pressure in my chest. She was looking forward to it. On Saturday, Eleanor started packing. I sat on the edge of our bed and just watched. 3 months' worth of luggage was less than I expected. It was one medium-sized suitcase. Clothes, makeup, and a few books. It was a terribly small collection of items for a 32-year life. It was then I realized that most of what made Eleanor her wasn't in this house anymore. It had been packed away, emotionally, for years. She'd come back to get anything else if she needed it, she said, zipping the bag. She turned towards me, her face unreadable. It was as if she was going on a long trip. Are you not going to contact me? I asked, my voice small. Am I just supposed to sit here and wait? I'll keep it to a bare minimum, she replied, not unkindly. I think I need the space for this to be a real test, for me to know it's real. A bare minimum relationship. That's what we'd had for 10 years. Now it was just official. Sunday night, we had our last dinner together. Eleanor had made a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. It tasted just like always. Perfect. Comforting. And tonight, absolutely heartbreaking. Thank you, Eleanor, I said, setting down my fork. What? She looked a little surprised. For dinner, and for taking care of everything. All these years. I know I haven't said it. That's only natural, she said, starting to clear the plates. Natural. The word hung in the air, but maybe I'd taken for granted too much. I wasn't thanking my wife. I was thanking my roommate, my unpaid housekeeper, on her last day of service. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in a long time. Or rather, I tried to sleep. We had been sleeping in separate rooms for the better part of a year. My snoring, her restlessness, we'd said. But tonight, she was here. Eleanor lay with her back to me, a solid, unbreachable wall. I felt the urge to put my hand on her shoulder, to just touch her, to say, "Please, don't go. I'll change. I'll listen. I'll be different." But I refrained. The gesture felt false. It would have been a lie, an act of desperation, not a promise of change. I hadn't earned the right to touch her. 3 months from tomorrow, I thought, staring at the ceiling in the dark, she'd be spending time with another man, in his house, in his bed. Monday morning, I was up early, but I didn't go downstairs. I stood in the upstairs bedroom, looking through the blinds of the window that faced the street. At 9 a.m., a clean, dark blue Subaru pulled up. A man named Julian came to pick her up. He got out. I saw him through the window from the second floor. He was tall, looked to be in good shape. He had a gentle face, like she said, with dark, wavy hair. He wasn't some slick, young predator. He looked nice, capable, which somehow was worse. As Eleanor came out the front door, wheeling her small suitcase, he met her at the walkway. He didn't hug her. He just smiled, nodded politely, and took the suitcase from her, lifting it easily into the back of his car. Eleanor stood by the car door, looked up at the second-floor window where she knew I'd be. "I'm off," she called out, her voice clear in the quiet morning air. I didn't reply. I just watched. I watched my wife of 32 years open the passenger door and get into a car with another man. After hearing the sound of the car driving away, the house was enveloped in a profound, deafening silence. It was a silence so total, so complete, that I could finally, for the first time, hear just how empty this house had been for years. A week had passed. Or maybe it was a week and a day. Time had started to get a little soupy. The first day, that Monday, I'd sat in my recliner in the evening, phone in hand, and waited for 9 p.m. I waited for the sound of the refrigerator door closing, for the sound of her footsteps, for the quiet, dismissive good work. Nothing. The silence in the house wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was loud. It was a dense, heavy, suffocating blanket of nothing. And it was in this silence that all the little noises I'd never noticed before became deafening. The ticking of the clock in the hallway. The groan of the pipes when the heating kicked in. The house was alive, but its partner was gone. And I, the man who was just a piece of furniture in the living room, was now the sole audience for its grief. I had idly wondered if I could get used to life without Eleanor, but I realized by Wednesday that I wasn't living without her. I was living in the monument of her absence. Her ghost was everywhere. And that's when the second, more humiliating realization set in. I was completely incompetent. I had fancied myself a self-sufficient man. I went to work. I paid my share of the bills. I handled the car maintenance. I was a partner. But it turns out the roommate who had just left had been doing about 98% of the work. Every time I opened the fridge, I was confronted with my own failure. Eleanor hadn't just cooked. She curated. The fridge had always been full of labeled containers, fresh vegetables, things that could be turned into meals. Now, after 3 days, there was nothing there but a half-empty bottle of ketchup, some old pickles, and the convenience store bento boxes, and instant food I'd started to accumulate. The house, which she kept impeccably clean, began to turn on me. A fine layer of dust settled on the coffee table. My own coffee rings, from the mug I just left there, became a permanent fixture. The laundry kept piling up, a mountain of my own shirts and socks in the corner of the bedroom, spilling out a hamper. I'd look at the washing machine and feel a genuine sense of intimidation. What settings did she use? What was the difference between detergent and fabric softener? Cleaning never got done. I was living in a rapidly decaying museum of my own neglect. Each dust bunny, each unwashed plate, was a testament to the 32 years of invisible labor I had simply taken for granted. The state, of course, followed me to work. I wasn't just pale, I was distracted. I was making stupid mistakes, forgetting to reply to emails, zoning out in the middle of meetings. I was just walking around in a daze. My colleague David, the one who was also having wife troubles, stopped me by the coffee machine on Thursday. "Arthur, man, you've been seriously down lately," he said, his voice low with genuine concern. "You look haunted. Did you have a fight with Eleanor? A really bad one?" I just shook my head, staring into my mug. "No, David, that's not it." I gave a vague, tired sigh. We weren't fighting. In fact, it might have been better if we had. A good, loud, plate-throwing fight would have at least been a connection. It would have shown some passion, some fire. This was worse. This was a spreadsheet. This was an audit. David, bless him, tried to relate. I know what you mean. Sometimes the quiet is worse. Last night, my wife and I just ate dinner in total silence, both on our phones. It's like, why are we even here? I just nodded. Oh, David, at least she's still at the table. At least you're in the same house. I walked back to my desk, feeling more isolated than ever. That night, while drinking a beer and watching TV, or rather, staring at the phone, as was my sad ritual, I had the first of what would become many sudden, vivid, and agonizing thoughts. I wonder what Eleanor is doing right now. The thought wasn't gentle. It was an invasive, brutal imagining. Is she having dinner with that man, Julian? Of course she is. He's a chef. I imagined it. I imagined her sitting at a clean, trendy kitchen island, not in our dated 90s-era home. I imagined him cooking for her. Really cooking. Sautéing, plating, drizzling. Is she laughing at his jokes? His 47-year-old jokes? And then, the thought that coiled in my stomach. Is she spending more intimate time with him? My imagination ran wild, and it was cruel. I pictured his hands. A chef's hands. Capable, strong, and clean. I imagined him teaching her how to hold a knife, his hand over hers. I imagined him listening to her, his head tilted, his eyes focused, as she told him all the things she had never, in 32 years, told me. The intimacy I was jealous of wasn't just physical. It was the intimacy of attention. I drank my beer, the cold liquid doing nothing put out the fire in my gut. I felt sick. The second week crawled by. The house got messier. I started to smell like the instant noodles I was living on. On a Friday in the second week, just as I was about to pour my third beer, my phone buzzed on the table. A number I didn't recognize. No, a number I did recognize. It was Eleanor. My heart did a painful lurch. I stared at the screen, my hand shaking slightly. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello? Arthur? It's me. I waited. Arthur, I'm doing well. Her voice. It was exactly as I'd heard in the kitchen. It was cheerful, not just polite cheerful. It sounded genuinely light, younger. Well, okay, I managed to say. That's good. A pause. The line crackled. How about you? She asked. Are you okay? I looked around the messy living room. At the pile of laundry, I could see down the hall. At the stack of convenience store containers on the coffee table. I'm doing well. I lied. I'm eating well. I'm just eating convenience store bento boxes, though the words were in my head. A pathetic, silent scream. I'm not okay. The house is a mess. I'm a mess. But I said nothing. Eleanor was silent for a moment. A long, assessing silence. She knew I was lying. Of course she did. I'm sorry, she said, her voice losing a little of its cheer. And that made me angry. The pity. There's no need to apologize, I said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. That's your decision. You wanted this. That's true, but... She trailed off. Look, if you need anything, please let me know. The number for the plumber is on the fridge. Right, the plumber. Okay. Another painful, gaping silence. Well, bye, I said. Goodbye, Arthur. She hung up. It was a short conversation, maybe 2 minutes. But it wrecked me. I had felt a small, desperate flicker of relief to hear her voice, but it was immediately extinguished by the sound of her voice. She was happy. She was thriving. And I couldn't tell if her call was because she cared about me or not. It felt like the obligatory check-in. The call the project manager makes to the satellite office to make sure the pipes haven't burst. She wasn't calling her husband. She was calling her roommate to make sure he hadn't burned the house down. I sat there in the dark, my beer now warm, and I felt a loneliness so profound, so absolute, that it was almost hard to breathe. The phone call from Eleanor didn't just wreck me for the night. It reset my entire emotional clock. The faint, stupid hope I'd been nursing, that she was miserable, that this was a mistake, that she'd call me crying, was gone. She was happy. She was cheerful. The experiment was, from her perspective, a resounding success. And I, the control group, was left to rot in the messy, silent laboratory of our marriage. In the 3rd week, the despair really set in. It was no longer a sharp shock. It was a dull, chronic ache. The house was a disaster. I had, in a fit of desperation, finally attempted to use the washing machine. I put everything in on one setting, hot heavy duty, and had managed to shrink 2 of my best work sweaters. The kitchen sink was a precarious tower of unwashed plates, and I was now eating my convenience store meals directly out of plastic containers to avoid adding to the pile. I was a 58-year-old man, 2 years from retirement, reduced to living like a 19-year-old college student in a trash dorm room. This was my state of mind when the company drinking party came around. Normally, I hated these things. Mandatory fun. I'd usually make an appearance, have one beer, say hello to the boss, and be home by 7:30. But on this Friday, the thought of being alone when I got home, the thought of walking into that dark, silent, messy house, was so unbearable that I stayed. And I didn't just stay. I drank. I found myself in a corner booth with a few of the younger guys from the sales department. "Mr. Harrison, you're really drinking today. This is unusual for you." A young guy named Ben called out to me, his face flushed and cheerful. "It's nice once in a while, Ben. Keeps the blood flowing," I slurred, signaling to the waitress for another whiskey. As I got drunker, the carefully constructed wall I'd built around my secret began to crumble. The alcohol amplified the self-pity, the loneliness, the humiliation. It all churned in my gut, desperate for an escape. Ben was talking about some new client, and I just broke. That's the thing about clients, Ben. I started, my voice thick. You think you've got him. You think you got the contract. It's all signed, 32 years. And then they just go to a competitor, a younger competitor. "Hey, a chef." Ben just stared at me, his smile frozen. "Hey, Chef Mr. Harrison." I don't follow. I was letting my true feelings slip out. The amount of time I spent alone at home, the loneliness of Eleanor's absence, and the complicated, agonizing feelings I had about her spending time with another man. I was right on the verge of telling him everything. To be honest, I almost opened my mouth to Ben, but something stopped me. Maybe it was a look of utter, drunken confusion on his face. Maybe it was the last, flickering ember of my pride. There was no way I could talk to him about something like this. It wasn't just a wife trouble story like David's. It was a humiliating, bizarre confession of my own utter failure as a man. I abruptly stood up, nearly knocking my chair over. "Gotta go. Early start tomorrow." I stumbled out of the bar and onto the late-night train. On the train home, packed in with other drunk office workers and late-night revelers, the loneliness was somehow even worse. I was surrounded by people, but I had never felt more isolated. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Eleanor's name. I almost sent Eleanor a text message. I typed it out, the letters swimming in my vision. "This is killing me. Please come home." Then I deleted it. Too pathetic. I typed another. "How is he? Is he better than me?" Deleted. Too angry. And then just, "I miss you." My thumb hovered over the send button. But I couldn't do it. Now was the time to be patient. Or maybe it wasn't patience. Maybe it was just sheer, stubborn pride. She had made her choice. She was happy. My begging would only confirm her decision. I put the phone back in my pocket and stared at my own blurry reflection in the dark train window. A month later, I had a new routine. It wasn't a good one, but it was mine. Wake up, go to work, buy a bento box on the way home, eat in a recliner, stare at the phone, sleep in the guest room. I couldn't stand the smell of the main bedroom, with its mountain of unwashed laundry. I was a ghost. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I ran out of everything. No instant noodles, no frozen meals, not even a clean spoon. I was forced to go to the local high street, to the small, upscale market Eleanor had always frequented. I hated it. It was full of bright lights and happy couples pushing carts. I just wanted to get my microwave meals and leave. I was in the frozen food aisle, trying to decide between lasagna and curry, when I heard my name. "Arthur?" "Arthur Harrison." I turned. It was Susan, one of Eleanor's closest friends. A woman I'd known for 20 years. My heart sank. "Good work." Hello, Susan." Susan's smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp. She looked at me, then looked into my sad little shopping basket. I saw her register the 2 frozen dinners, the tube of crackers and the block of cheese. "Eleanor's doing well, isn't she?" she asked, her voice light. "I haven't heard from her recently, but I saw her last week, just for a moment." "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yes, she's doing well." It wasn't a lie. By her own account, she was thriving, but I couldn't tell Susan the details. I couldn't say, "Oh, I haven't seen her in a month. She's living with a 47-year-old chef to see if she still feels like a woman." "That's good," Susan continued, oblivious. I have to say, Arthur, she's been so lively lately. I just saw her across the street, but she looked, I don't know, radiant. She was full of life. It's wonderful to see. That cooking class must be doing wonders for her. Those words struck a chord with me. Lively, radiant, full of life. I wonder if Eleanor was as lively when she was with me. The answer was a cold, hard no. For the last 5, maybe 10 years, lively was the last word I would have used to describe my wife. Efficient, tired, polite, resigned. Those were the words. The liveliness was something she'd found the moment she'd stepped out of my orbit. I wasn't just a neutral roommate. I was the thing that was draining the life from her. But, Arthur, Susan said, her smile fading into a look of concern. You've lost a little weight, haven't you? You're eating properly, I hope. Oh, it's fine, Susan. Just watching my figure. Retirement's around the corner, you know. I lied weakly. Susan looked at me worriedly, her gaze lingering on my wrinkled shirt and the dark circles under my eyes. She knew something was wrong. But, like a polite colleague, she didn't press. Well, you take care of yourself, Arthur. And tell Eleanor I said hello, will you? I will. Goodbye, Susan. She left. I stood in the frozen food aisle for a long time, the cold air seeping into my clothes. She was full of life. The words just echoed. She was full of life. And I was here, a ghost haunting the frozen food aisle, holding a box of microwave lasagna. Something, finally, in my numb, defeated brain broke. So there I was, in the frozen food aisle, having a full-blown existential crisis. I was the ghost of marriages past. Susan's words, lively, radiant, full of life, had confirmed my worst fear. It wasn't just that Eleanor had left me. It was that I was the reason she had needed to leave. I was the anchor, the drain, the human equivalent of beige wallpaper. I went home, put the sad, frozen lasagna in the freezer, and just sat in the recliner. The silence was back, but now it was filled with Susan's voice. Full of life, full of life. This went on for another week. I was now in the 6th week of my 3-month sentence. I was just existing, a shell. And then Eleanor called again. I saw her name flash on the screen, and my heart did that familiar, painful jump. But this time, something was different. I picked it up. Hello, Arthur? Her voice, the cheerfulness I'd heard last time was gone. It was still strong, still clear, but there was something else a little different. There was a slight hesitation, a note of, what was it, conflict? Arthur, I'd like to talk to you for a bit this Sunday. I sat up straight. This was new. Talk? On the phone? No, she said. In person. Just at a cafe. In town. We can't meet at the house. I could sense the hesitation in her voice. This wasn't a social call. This wasn't a check-in on the plumbing. This was an event. My mind raced. This was it. This was the meeting where she'd make it official. She was going to tell me she was staying with Julian. She was starting the proper discussion about divorce. I wondered if something had happened. Had I done something wrong? Was she upset I was letting the house fall apart? A cafe? Okay, Eleanor. Where? We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in front of the station, a neutral place. Sunday at 2 p.m. The next 2 days were a blur. I was terrified, but I had to do something. I couldn't meet her like this. I wasn't just a sad, lonely man. I was a mess. I spent all of Saturday cleaning. I did 6 loads of laundry and only minorly shrunk 1 t-shirt. I scrubbed the kitchen until my hands were raw. I shaved, for the first time in what felt like weeks. I put on my best remaining non-shrunken shirt. I was polishing the armor of my old life, preparing for the final blow. On Sunday, I showed up at the cafe 20 minutes early. I sat at a small table in the back, my hands shaking, my stomach in knots. And then, exactly at 2 p.m., she walked in. Seeing my wife for the first time in a month and a half, I finally understood what Susan meant. It wasn't just that she looked brighter. She looked transformed. She seemed younger. Her hair was different, styled, with more body. Her clothes were more stylish than before, a fashionable, well-cut blouse and dark jeans that fit her perfectly. It wasn't the practical, roommate uniform I was used to, but it was more than the clothes. It was her posture. She stood taller. She looked around the cafe with a calm, self-possessed energy. She wasn't my tired, invisible wife. She was Eleanor, a woman. And for the first time, I felt a stab of something I hadn't felt in 20 years, desire. And it was immediately followed by a wave of profound inadequacy. Good work, she said, slipping into the chair. A small, nervous smile. You too? I replied, my voice sounding rusty. We just looked at each other for a while. The silence was thick. She ordered a black coffee. I already had one, which was now cold. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Arthur, can I tell you a little about Julian? My heart sank. Here it comes. The glowing review. The why he's better than you speech. I just nodded. I braced myself. I had mixed feelings. Like, I didn't want to hear it, but also, I had to. I needed to know what I was up against. He's a very kind person, she began, just as I'd feared. A truly gentle soul. He's an excellent cook, obviously. And he's a good listener. He remembers little things I say. He's patient. I see, I said, staring into my cold coffee. It was the exact list of qualities I knew I was lacking. But I looked up. But Eleanor looked down, carefully choosing her words. But is there something missing? I feel I'm not satisfied. My brain snagged on that word. Not satisfied? I was a little surprised by her words. What does that mean? He's a 47-year-old, kind, handsome, patient chef who listens. How can you not be satisfied? She struggled to explain. It's hard to explain. Julian, he's just too perfect. I just stared at her. Too perfect? That's a problem? He's so kind, she elaborated, her frustration clear. He cares for me. He's kind to me. He never raises his voice. He agrees with everything I say. He treats me like I'm a guest he's trying to impress. But somehow there's no tension. Tension? I repeated. I thought no tension was a goal. No, she said, shaking her head. I thought so too. But it's it. When I returned home from the cafe, the usual silence awaited. But for the first time in 6 weeks, it didn't feel like a hostile presence. It felt neutral. It felt like an empty canvas. Eleanor's words lingered in my mind, replaying in a continuous, hopeful loop. I'm not satisfied, she'd said. Not with him. It was more natural when I was with you. Those phrases were a lifeline. The dissatisfaction she felt toward a man called Julian, the perfect, attentive, listening man, wasn't just a complaint. It was a crack in his armor. It was proof that 32 years of shared history, of friction and irritation and comfortable silence, had forged a bond that a perfect stranger couldn't replicate in a month and a half. It might be proof that her feelings for me hadn't fully awakened, but more importantly, that they hadn't fully died. And then I remembered her final challenge. Why don't you try something new while I'm away? Make good use of your time alone. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was an instruction. It was a test. She was changing, and she was waiting to see if I could, too. I looked around at the house. I had just spent a day cleaning. It was a start, but it was just maintenance. It wasn't growth. That night, standing in the kitchen that still smelled faintly of Eleanor's perfume, I decided to try cooking for the first time in, well, maybe ever. I wasn't just going to heat up a frozen lasagna. I was going to make something. I opened the pantry. It was a foreign country. I found a box of pasta and a jar of sauce. Simple enough. But then I saw a bag of onions and some garlic. I remember watching Eleanor chop them, her movements a fluid, effortless dance. I could do that. My attempt was not an effortless dance. It was a clumsy, tear-filled battle. I hacked at the onion until it was a pile of uneven chunks. I tried to mince the garlic and ended up with bruised, sticky bits all over the cutting board. I put a pot of water on a boil and immediately forgot about it, only remembering when it started steaming up the entire kitchen. The first attempt was a disaster. The pasta was a sticky, starchy clump. The sauce was bland. But I ate it. I sat at the kitchen table, in the spot where Eleanor used to sit, and I ate my lumpy, mediocre pasta. And as I did, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just passively consuming fuel from a plastic tray. I had created this. I had engaged with my own survival. It was a small, pathetic step, but it was a step forward. The next night, I tried again. A simple stir-fry. I watched the video on my phone, propped up against the salt shaker. I chopped the vegetables slowly, deliberately. I didn't burn the rice. I didn't overcook the chicken. It was a simple stir-fry, but a meal I made myself tasted far better than any convenience store bento. It wasn't just about the flavor. It was about the effort. And that's when it truly hit me. For the first time, in that clean, quiet kitchen, I realized that Eleanor had been doing this for me every single day for 32 years. Not as a job, not as a roommate's chore. She had been doing it with this kind of feeling, this quiet pride. This small act of creation. She had been putting her time, her energy, and her care onto a plate and handing it to a man who barely looked up from his phone to acknowledge it. Every meal she had ever made was a quiet, "I love you," and I had been deaf to it for a decade. The remaining month and a half of her absence no longer felt like a prison sentence. It felt like an opportunity. While it seemed long, it still felt like it would be a short time to prepare. I started a new routine. In these 2.5 months, I definitely added a new repertoire of dishes. I learned to make a decent omelet. I perfected my stir-fry. I even baked a passable loaf of bread. I started to clean my room more carefully than before, not just out of necessity, but out of a newfound respect for the space. I also started reading again, picking up the books that had been gathering dust on my nightstand. Just as Eleanor had said, I started to make good use of my time alone. The silence of the house transformed. It was no longer an oppressive void. It became a peaceful, reflective space where I could hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. I was changing, and people started to notice. Something unexpected happened at work. It was about 2 weeks before Eleanor was due to make her final decision. I was at my desk, feeling calmer than I had in a long time. My colleague from the accounting department, Carol, approached me. "Arthur, you've been acting a bit different lately." Carol, or Mrs. Peterson as I usually called her, was a 53-year-old woman with a gentle smile and kind, perceptive eyes. She was a widow I knew and had a reputation for being quiet, professional, and incredibly competent. We'd worked in the same building for 15 years, but we'd barely spoken outside of work before. "Is that so?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Yes," she said, tilting her head. "She seems calmer, if I may say so, more present. It's nice to see." Her simple observation was a profound validation. The changes I was making weren't just in my head. They were real. They were visible. That day, I was working overtime and was late getting out of the office. The building was mostly empty. As I was waiting for the elevator, Carol walked up. "Thank you for your hard work, Arthur. I'll be off now." "You too, Carol." We shared the elevator, the small space filled with a comfortable silence. Just as the doors opened to the lobby, Carol said, "Arthur, if you don't mind me asking, how about we have dinner sometime?" I was taken aback by the sudden invitation. My brain stalled. "Dinner? I see," she said, her smile gentle, not pushy. "I was just hoping to hear about the feelings of a man approaching retirement. My husband passed before he got the chance, and I'm always curious about what that stage of life feels like for people." Her suggestion didn't seem impure or flirtatious. It was friendly, grown-up, but still, I had mixed feelings about having dinner with another woman now that my wife was living with another man. It felt complicated, symmetrical, in a way that made me uneasy. "Let me think about it for a moment, Carol. Thank you for the offer." "Of course," she said, and we parted ways in the lobby. I thought about Carol's invitation that night when I had time. I was standing in my clean kitchen, looking at the 2 cookbooks I'd bought. Eleanor had been spending almost 3 months with a man named Julian. Was it so wrong for me to have a simple dinner with a kind colleague? I thought it was okay for me to have dinner with someone, too. But was this a reaction? A petty tit-for-tat move? Was I doing this to get back at Eleanor? And then I remembered her words again. Try something new. A new recipe. A new book. A new conversation. Maybe this was part of it. This wasn't about revenge. This was about me, Arthur, learning to be a person in the world again. A person who could have dinner with a friend. It wasn't a flashback or a natural progression. It was a conscious choice to re-engage with life. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was living. The next day at work, I walked over to the accounting department. "Carol?" She looked up, a little surprised. "About your invitation," I said. "I'd like that very much." The following Friday, I found myself standing in front of my closet, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I had no idea what to wear. It was the night of my dinner with Carol Peterson. I'd spent the last 32 years of my life in a comfortable, predictable rotation of work-appropriate polo shirts, weekend-appropriate yard work clothes, and the one good suit for weddings and funerals. The idea of dressing for a social outing with a woman who was not my wife was a completely foreign concept. I felt a sharp, unexpected pang of guilt. Here I was, preening in front of a mirror, while my wife was living with a 4_7_ old chef. I took a deep breath. This wasn't a date. This wasn't betrayal. This was what Eleanor herself had told me to do. Try something new. Make good use of your time alone. This was me, Arthur Harrison, finally making good use of my time. I settled on a clean, dark blue button-down shirt, one of the few I hadn't managed to shrink, and my good trousers. I looked respectable. I looked like a man who wasn't currently living on instant noodles. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant in front of the station. It was the kind of place Eleanor and I had always said we should try sometime, and then never did, opting instead for takeout in front of the TV. It was warm, filled with a low, happy murmur of conversation, the smell of garlic and wine and soft lighting. It was a complete opposite of my house. Carol was wearing an elegant one-piece dress, a deep forest green and a simple gold necklace. She looked completely different from her usual accounting department self. She looked relaxed, sophisticated, and I realized with a small jolt, very pretty. "Sorry to have kept you waiting, Arthur," she said, sliding into the booth. "No, not at all. Thank you for coming. And thank you for the invitation." The first 10 minutes were a little awkward. We were two colleagues navigating a new, uncharted social territory. But the food came, the wine was poured, and the conversation began to flow. We started with the easy stuff. Work. We talked about the upcoming merger, the new software system, and our shared, impending sense of retirement. "I'm terrified of it, honestly," I admitted, swirling the wine in my glass. "It's this giant, empty void, 2 years away. I'm supposed to be excited, but I have no idea what I'm going to do all day." Carol smiled, a knowing, slightly sad smile. My husband, Robert, he was the same. He had all these plans, a boat, a workshop, but he never got the chance. He passed away 10 years ago, just before his 60th birthday. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I never knew the details." "It's okay," she said, her gaze steady. "It was hard. I had to raise our daughter alone for that last, difficult stretch through college. But we managed, and now it's been 10 years since I've been on my own. It was hard at first, but now I think living alone isn't so bad. I have my routine. I have my books." She paused, taking a sip of wine. "But sometimes I just feel like having dinner or going to the movies with someone. Not a thing," she added, laughing a little. "Just a conversation, a shared meal. You know," her words hit me like a ton of bricks. A shared meal. That was it. That was the human connection I had been starving for. It wasn't about sex or passion. It was about sitting across from another adult and not feeling invisible. Her loneliness was different from mine. Hers was born of loss, mine of neglect, but it felt the same. "I know exactly what you mean," I said, and my voice was thick with an honesty that surprised me. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about her daughter, who was now a lawyer in another city. We talked about books we'd read. We talked about the state of the world. It was easy. It was the most normal I had felt in months. Carol was intelligent. She was funny, and most of all, she was a kind, empathetic listener. Then, as we were finishing our coffee, she leaned forward slightly. "I'm sure you and your wife, Eleanor, are doing well. You two have always seemed so solid. 32 years, isn't it? That's an accomplishment." I froze. The warm, easy feeling of the evening evaporated, replaced by that familiar, cold chill of my secret. I looked down into my empty coffee cup. I couldn't lie to this woman, not after the honest, open conversation we just had, but I couldn't possibly tell her the truth. I was a little stumped by the question. It's complicated, Carol. I finally managed. Life has been challenging lately." Carol looked at my expression, at the sudden tension in my shoulders. I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She was a woman who knew what grief and difficulty looked like, and, to her incredible credit, she didn't press any further. "Well," she said, gently changing the subject, "challenging is just another word for interesting, isn't it? It keeps us on our toes." She signaled for the check. As we stood outside the restaurant in the cool night air, Carol turned to me. "Thank you for today, Arthur. This was lovely. I'd love to meet you again when you have time. It was fun. I liked the hat too, Carol. It really was." I walked home. I didn't take the train. It was only a 20-minute walk, and I needed the air. I felt lighter. I felt seen. I had just spent 2 hours being treated not as a failed husband or a pathetic roommate, but as Arthur, a man on the verge of retirement, a man with thoughts and a valid perspective, a man worth talking to. When I got home, the house was dark and silent, as usual, but I was different. I wasn't stumbling into a void. I was walking into my own clean, quiet space, feeling the warm, pleasant glow of a good meal and a better conversation. I took off my jacket, put my keys in the bowl by the door, a small act of order I'd started, and glanced at my phone. I found a message from Eleanor. My heart, which had been beating calmly all evening, gave a sudden, hard thump. It was a text message. "Good work," it started. The old, familiar, cold greeting. But then it changed. "I hope everything is okay. I know I said I'd wait until the end, but I need to talk to you. Can we meet again next week?" I stared at the message. The power dynamic, which had been so completely skewed for 2.5 months, suddenly felt different. I wasn't the desperate, lonely husband waiting by the phone. I was a man who had just come home from a very nice dinner with a very nice woman. I took a moment, letting the old panic subside, and replied with a calmness I hadn't possessed a day earlier. "Everything is okay. I'm free next Sunday." I hit send. The reply came back almost instantly. A single small ping in the silent house. "Thank you. I'll see you at home next time." I read the message twice. At home, not the cafe, not the neutral ground. Eleanor was coming home. For the first time in nearly 3 months, she was coming back to the house I had cleaned, the house I had learned to cook in. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a finale. She was coming back to the scene of the crime, and I had no idea if she was coming to retrieve her last few things, or to tell me she was finally ready to stay. The week leading up to that Sunday was the longest of my life, but it was an entirely different kind of waiting. The first 2.5 months had been a passive, agonizing countdown to doom. This last week was active. It was preparation for a negotiation. I wasn't just a man who had been left behind. I was now a man who had cleaned his own house, learned to feed himself, and had a standing dinner invitation from an intelligent, kind woman. I wasn't just waiting for Eleanor to come home and pass judgment. I was preparing my home to receive a guest who also happened to be my wife. I spent the week in a flurry of activity. I wasn't just cleaning, I was curating. I bought new sheets for the bed, our bed, which I had finally started sleeping in again. I bought fresh flowers and put them on the kitchen table, a move so uncharacteristic for me that I almost laughed out loud. I even went through my laundry mountain and threw out the old, shrunken, and hopeless items. I was shedding my old, pathetic skin. On Sunday, I was up at 7 a.m. I didn't just make coffee. I made a proper breakfast for myself. I read the paper. I listened to the quiet. I was nervous, my heart thumping a low, steady rhythm of anxiety, but I wasn't scared. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. At exactly 2 p.m., the same time as our cafe meeting, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Not the Subaru. A taxi. I stood in the living room, my hands in my pockets, and just waited. I heard the front door open, the one she still had a key for. I heard the click of the lock, a sound that was once the most mundane in the world, now charged with almost unbearable significance. She stepped into the entryway. It had been 3 months since she last stood in this house, and she seemed, for a moment, like a stranger, a visitor. Her clothes and hairstyle were even more refined than before. She was wearing a simple, elegant trench coat. She looked like a woman who knew exactly who she was. She looked up, saw me standing there, and paused. The air was thick. "I'm home now," she said, her voice quiet. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a question. Is this still home? Am I still welcome? It was the first time a married couple had exchanged greetings in this house in a long time, and the words felt ancient and brand new. Eleanor looked around the house. Her eyes widened just slightly. She was a woman who missed nothing, and she was cataloging every change. She saw the clean floors. She saw the dust-free surfaces. She saw the flowers on the kitchen table. Her gaze lingered on the kitchen, which was spotless. The sink was empty. My cookbooks were stacked neatly on the counter. "You've kept it clean," she said, her voice tinged with genuine surprise. She slipped off her coat, her movement slow, as if she were testing the environment. "Well, I've had some time on my hands," I said, trying to sound casual. "I've gotten pretty good at cooking, actually." I didn't mention my conversation with Susan, but I didn't need to. The evidence was all around her. This was not the house she had left, and I was not the man. "Shall I make some coffee?" I offered, already moving toward the kitchen. I was the host now. "Thank you." "Yes, please." She followed me into the kitchen and sat at the table, in her old spot, looking strangely formal. I made the coffee, my movements practiced and steady. I felt her eyes on me as I worked. I wasn't a clumsy oaf who couldn't find the filters. I was a man who knew his way around his own kitchen. I set the mug down in front of her and sat opposite, the same positions as that final, awful dinner. But the entire universe had shifted as we sat facing each other in the living room, surrounded by the quiet ticking of the clock. Eleanor spoke. "Arthur, I've made a decision." My heart started beating faster. The moment was here. "What is it?" "Next week, I'm ending my life with Julian." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but I didn't celebrate. I just waited. "There's still 1 week until the 3-month agreement," I noted, my voice steady. "I know, but I've been thinking so much these past 2.5 months. I've been thinking ever since our talk at the cafe." She looked into her mug. "Julian, he's a really, truly nice person, but he wasn't what I was looking for." What was different? What was wrong? Eleanor thought for a long moment, searching for the exact words. "It's too reassuring," she said finally. It was the same word she'd used at the cafe, but now it carried more weight. Living with him, it was like living in a luxury hotel. Everything was perfect. He never left a dish in the sink. He never got angry. He never sighed impatiently. He was always on. He cherished me, but he didn't challenge me. He didn't cause me any trouble or make me angry. He just agreed. He listened and he agreed. And I started to feel like I was disappearing. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for me to understand. At first, it was wonderful. To be seen, to be heard. But after a while, I realized, I wonder if that's love, or is it just customer service? "Did you want love? A passion?" "Or so I thought," she said, shaking her head. "I thought I wanted a grand, romantic gesture. But I was wrong. It wasn't that. What I wanted was for him to see me as a woman again." "And Julian didn't see you as a woman?" "Yes, he did," she admitted. "But it was out of kindness. It was simple. He saw a woman. A woman he wanted to impress, to take care of. It was sweet, but it had no history. There was no complicated emotion when he looked at me." She leaned forward. "When you look at me, Arthur, even when you were at your worst, when you were ignoring me, I could still feel the 32 years. I could feel the irritation, the history, the comfort, the anger. It was real. Julian's kindness was like a thin coat of paint. Yours, ours, is the whole damn messy, crumbling wall." She took a shaky breath. "Arthur, you still see me as a woman, don't you?" I couldn't answer that question right away, because the answer wasn't simple. "Eleanor," I said, my voice quiet, "when you left, I saw you as the person who had abandoned me. When I saw you at the cafe, I saw a stranger, a beautiful, confident stranger I didn't know at all. And now, sitting here, Fumi's, Eleanor's, feelings had definitely changed over the past 3 months. And so had mine. After anger and sadness, there was now an indescribable, complicated love. "I'm watching you," I said. "I'm seeing you for the first time in years. Yes, I see you as a woman. I see you as my wife. And I'm terribly in love with you." "Really? Really?" Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes and spilled over, running down her cheeks. She didn't sob, she just wept. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping at her face. "I've done something terrible. I put you through hell." "You don't have to apologize," I said, and I meant it. "Even if you needed me, this time, maybe we both needed it. You needed to see what else was out there. And I needed to be left alone. I needed to see what I had become. You leaving, Eleanor, it was the only thing that could have woken me up." I paused, and then I knew I had to complete the circle. The scales had to be balanced, for good. And to be honest, I said, my own voice a little shaky. I was hesitant, too, but I decided to be honest. I told her about the dinner. I had dinner with the dentist. No, not the dentist, with Carol Peterson from accounting. Eleanor looked surprised. Her tears stopped. Her head tilted. That old, assessing look returning. "Is that so?" "Her name is Carol," I reiterated. "She's 53. A widow. She invited me out as a friend. We talked about retirement. There's nothing special about it, but it was nice. It was the first time in a long time I felt like a person worth talking to." Eleanor thought for a moment, processing this new, symmetrical piece of information. This wasn't part of her plan. I wasn't just a sad husband waiting by the door. I was a man having dinner with an elegant, age-appropriate woman. And then she smiled. A small, genuine, relieved smile. "That's fine," she said softly. That's good. Arthur, you're a human being. 2. You deserved a good dinner. You deserved to be seen. In that moment, we weren't the lever and the left. We were just two human beings, two very tired, very complicated equals, who had taken the strangest, most painful road imaginable, only to end up sitting right back at our own kitchen table. That Sunday, after Eleanor had made her confession, a new, tangible silence settled in the kitchen. The coffee was cold. The big, explosive revelation was over, and now we were left with the complicated, fragile pieces of what came next. That night, Eleanor stayed at the house. The sun went down. We ate a simple dinner, pasta which I cooked. She'd watched me, a small, curious smile on her face, as I moved around the kitchen with my newfound, clumsy competence. It was the most surreal meal of my life. By 10 p.m., the question that had been hanging in the air since she'd walked through the door finally had to be answered. Where do we sleep? Well, I said, clearing the last plate. It's getting late. I've been sleeping in the guest room. It's clean now. I added, a little defensively. I can take the sofa. You can have whichever room you want. Eleanor stood in the middle of the living room, looking from the sofa to the hallway. No, Arthur, that's ridiculous. I don't want to kick you out of your own bed, and I don't want to be in the guest room. It's our house. She looked towards the main bedroom. Can't we just sleep in the same room like we used to? It had been a long time since we had slept in the same bed as husband and wife. Even before she'd left, we'd been in separate rooms for the better part of a year, using my snoring and her restlessness as polite excuses to avoid an intimacy we'd both forgotten how to navigate. Walking into that bedroom together, getting ready for bed in that old, familiar, silent routine, felt more charged, more terrifying than my dinner with Carol. It was a final, most intimate frontier of our reconciliation. We moved around each other like cautious, respectful ghosts. I brushed my teeth. She changed in the ensuite bathroom. When she came out, she was wearing a simple, familiar pajama set I hadn't seen in months. She looked simply like my wife. I climbed into my side of the bed. I lay on my back, my hands folded on my chest. She climbed into her side. The mattress, which had felt so vast and empty for 3 months, now felt incredibly small, charged with the energy of the 6-inch chasm that separated us. But something was different. This wasn't the old silence of neglect. This was a new silence, one built on a shared, fragile respect. We were two survivors, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. We were more considerate of each other. I was conscious of my own breathing, trying not to be too loud. She, in turn, didn't immediately roll over and present me with her back, the cold, dismissive wall I'd known for years. She lay on her back, too, staring at the ceiling. And I could feel it. Our feelings of concern for each other were stronger than before. I wasn't just thinking about myself, about my victory, or my loneliness. I was genuinely wondering what was going through her mind. Was she regretting this? Was she disgusted by me? Was she comparing this threadbare, familiar bed to the perfect setup at Julian's? I wanted to speak, to fill the void, but I didn't dare break the spell. After what felt like an hour of this respectful, tense paralysis, she whispered into the dark, Arthur? Yeah. My voice was a little too loud. Thank you for dinner. It was really good. I smiled in the darkness. I learned from a video. You were right. It's good to have a new hobby. I'm glad you did, she whispered. Another silence. And then a small, tentative movement. Her hand moved across the sheet that separated us. A slow, hesitant motion until her fingers brushed the back of my hand. It wasn't a passionate, romantic gesture. It was a question. Are you still here? Are we okay? I turned my hand over, palm up, and our fingers lay together. A simple, dry, warm connection. We didn't say another word. We just lay there in the dark, in our old bed, holding hands. And for the first time in what felt like a decade, I fell asleep next to my wife, feeling not like her roommate but like her partner. The next day, I woke up first. I could smell her shampoo. She was still asleep, her face peaceful. I slipped out of bed, went downstairs, and made coffee. 2 mugs. When she came down, wrapped in her robe, she looked tired and she looked scared. The confident, transformed woman from the cafe was gone. This was just Eleanor. Morning, I said, handing her a mug. Thank you, Arthur. Yes, I petted, her hands trembling slightly. Today, I have to go back. My heart seized. Go back? To him. Yes. she said, her voice firming up. I have to. I can't end this with a text message. Arthur, that's not right. He's a good person. I owe him the respect of a proper goodbye. I have to go to his house, pack my last few things, and end it face to face. She was right. She was finishing this with the same deliberate, painful integrity she had started it with. Eleanor returned to Julian and properly said her goodbyes. She called a taxi. I stood at the living room window and watched her get in, just as I had 3 months before. But this time, I wasn't a prisoner watching his warden leave. I was a partner, watching his wife go to finish a difficult, necessary task. Those 3 hours were an agony of pacing. I cleaned the already clean kitchen. I rearranged my cookbooks. What if she got there and he convinced her to stay? What if perfection suddenly seemed like a better deal than my lumpy pasta and our complicated history? At 1:15 p.m., a taxi pulled up. She got out. She was carrying the same small suitcase she'd left with. She paid the driver, walked up the path, and opened the front door. She set the suitcase down in the entryway. Her shoulders were slumped. Her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying. Hard. So, I said, my voice gentle, it's done. She didn't answer. She just walked across the living room, put her arms around my neck, and buried her face on my shoulder, and she sobbed. It wasn't the polite, controlled tears from the cafe. This was a deep, shuddering, grief-stricken cry. The sound of a woman who had just navigated an impossible emotional minefield and had finally reached safe harbor. I just held her. I wrapped my arms around her and let her cry. It's okay, I whispered over and over. You're home. It's okay. I've got you. After a long time, she pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hands. I'm so sorry, Arthur. It was awful. How was it? I asked. He's such a good man, she wept. He's not a monster. He's just not you. She told me she had explained her feelings, her gratitude for his kindness, but the deep, unshakable feeling that it wasn't real, that her real, messy, irritating, wonderful home was with me. And Julian cried too, she said, her voice catching. He told me he understood. He said he'd known, for the last few weeks, that he was just a placeholder. He said he could feel my history with you in the room with them. He said he knew he was competing with a 32-year-old ghost. I see. So, the kind, gentle chef had been a gentleman, even in his defeat. He had taken care of her, and he had let her go. Eleanor stepped back, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at me with those raw, honest eyes. And then she did the most shocking thing of all. She stood in our living room, and she bowed deeply, a formal, profound gesture of respect. Thank you very much, Arthur. Eleanor, you don't have to bow to me. No, you don't understand, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not thanking you for letting me go. That's not it. I'm thanking you for changing. Thank you for cleaning this house. Thank you for learning to cook. Thank you for having dinner with Carol. Thank you for not just rolling over and dying. You didn't just wait for me. You became the man I want to come home to,